the Sivga Phoenix was one of few standout headphones of 2020. I know some people dislike the sound signature, but that's entirely a personal matter. The Phoenix is about $250, has robust build, and deep bass response, which was fairly surprising given its open back design. Emotiva released their first headphone, the GR1, near the end of 2020. The GR1 looks somewhat similar to the Phoenix, but comes at a higher price tag. There was some speculation that the GR1 is a Phoenix clone, or that Emotiva merely slapped their name onto an existing Chinese design. Today, we compare the GR1 to the Phoenix. Are these the same or different? I think it's safe to say that both the GR1 and the Phoenix are well constructed. They have a generous amount of metal and wood. However, the two are not identical. For example, the headband designs are rather different. The Phoenix uses a single layer of suspended padding. The GR1 uses what appears to me is padding that is nearly identical to that of the monolith M570. The yokes are different as well. Indeed, the GR1 has a slightly sturdier connection from the headband to the ear cups. Its metal yoke is thick. The Phoenix, on the other hand, has a joint that connects the headband to the yokes. This joint allows for horizontal adjustment. The cabling seems to be the same. Both headphones use dual 2.5mm jacks. The quality and feel of both cables is very similar. The earpads are also similar. In fact, they are interchangeable. They use the same attachment mechanism. They have the same density and angles. Emotiva does not sell replacement earpads at the moment, but Sivga does. Consequently, you could buy either a cloth or leather earpad from Sivga and attach that to the GR1. As for comfort, I find both headphones comfortable to me. The GR1 has slightly larger earpads than the stock earpads on the Phoenix. However, the leather Phoenix earpads seem to be the same size as the GR1 earpads. The Phoenix has some horizontal adjustment through its joint. This allows for a far more stable, contoured fit. The GR1, on the other hand, is stiff. It has no horizontal movement, and depending on your head shape, you may find a slight gap left between the earpads and your face. The GR1's headband design leaves much to be desired. It has a constant pressing force on my head. There seems to be a bit too much metal in the headband, which causes slight discomfort over time. The headband on the Phoenix seems comfortable, though it is hardly plush. Overall, both headphones have a robust build. Their outward designs are different enough to set them apart. Of the two, I would have to give a slight edge to the GR1 for robust construction, but the Phoenix is a better fitting headphone considering its horizontal adjustment. The GR1 reportedly has graphene-infused drivers, whatever that means. These are dynamic drivers that may have some element of graphene in the construction. The Phoenix has standard dynamic drivers that use, according to Sivga, a, quote, unique polycarbonate film. Who knows what this is? To test the sound signature of these headphones, I plugged them into a passive AB switch. I connected the switch to my Matrix Audio Mini iPro 3, which is a neutral amp DAC. I used the stock cable and earpads on the GR1, and I used the stock earpads and cable on the Phoenix. I played music through Amazon Music HD, and of course, I tried to volume match. The Phoenix has a deeper bass rendition than the GR1. Indeed, the Phoenix tends to provide more volume and reverberation in the sub-bass frequencies than the GR1. I have recently started using the Sicario original motion picture soundtrack as one of my methods for exploring bass performance. This soundtrack uses a lot of bass and rumble in most, if not all, the tracks. On the tracks The Beast and The Border, there is constant low rumble. That rumble is supposed to add reverberation to the mid-bass drums. The sub-bass and mid-bass should meld a little bit but retain clarity. The Phoenix provided the sub-bass rumble in both tracks. That rumble was present from the very beginning of each song. There was some melding between sub-bass and mid-bass, but no muddiness or distortion. At 45 seconds into The Beast, the sub-bass rumble is joined with drums and other elements. If distortion is to occur, it would occur here. However, the Phoenix did not distort, but the sound was elevated and combined. On the GR1, the sub-bass seemed rolled off in comparison. The rumble in these tracks seemed more subdued than what I heard on the Phoenix. The difference was not significant but noticeable. The reverberation did not interact as much with the other instruments as it had on the Phoenix. Separation between sub-bass and mid-bass was marginally clearer on the GR1. This was most obvious on the track The Beast, particularly at the 45-second mark. Going back and forth, the GR1 presented a clearer rendition of the sub-bass, mid-bass, and other instruments. In Conquer by Overwork, the GR1 recreated the rolling marble effect at the beginning of the track. This detail is supposed to pan from right to left to center, but the GR1 kept it dead center. There are multiple drums in this track, and the GR1 recreated all of them. Each was clear and had hard impact. However, it appeared that a bit of energy was missing. In other words, the sharp thwacking of drumsticks on the drumhead was a little bit blunted. On the Phoenix, the rolling marble effect sounded similar to what I heard on the GR1. The Phoenix also recreated all the various drums, but it appeared to me that the GR1 had a bit more clarity in this respect. There was just a slight amount more separation between each drum strike on the GR1. The drum impact sounded very similar between the headphones, but the Phoenix appeared to have a bit more energy. I listened to several hip-hop tracks including Pure Water, Uproar, Yupatek, and Reel It In. On the Phoenix, the sub-bass was audible from the beginning of each track. The subwoofer effect appeared to be fairly natural. It felt as if the subwoofer was in the same room as I was, but at the other end. I could feel the reverberation, and there was some melding between sub-bass and mid-bass, but no muddiness. The vocals remained 1 to 2 steps ahead of the instruments and retained their sparkle. The GR1's performance was similar, but not quite the same. The sub-bass seemed to be just a little bit more recessed than that of the Phoenix. Reverberation appeared to be marginally faster on the GR1, and there seemed to be a slight bit more clarity on the GR1. I went back and forth between these headphones, and I found it harder and harder to find significant differences. Overall, there are some similarities and differences in the bass presentation of these headphones. The GR1 tends to have a bit more clarity and marginally more separation between sub-bass and mid-bass. However, the GR1 apparently does not have a full sub-bass rendition. Whereas on hip-hop tracks the differences were rather minor, in songs from Sicario soundtrack the differences were more noticeable. The GR1 with those tracks appeared to have slightly rolled-off sub-bass compared to the Phoenix. Mid-bass slam is similar between these headphones, but I think that the Phoenix has a slight bit more energy in drum strikes. It was truly difficult to find a difference in mid's response between these headphones. In fact, although there are some slight variations in detail, the GR1 and Phoenix sound very close in the mids. In Orla Gartland's song Why Am I Like This, there is natural grain and sibilance recorded into the track. The GR1 accentuated the sibilance and grain marginally. Although not harsh, the GR1's rendition was not neutral. The Phoenix also recreates the grain and sibilance, and it too is not neutral in this regard. However, there is a noticeable difference in the amount offered. The Phoenix's sibilance is just slightly less than that of the GR1, and the grain appears to be closer to neutral on the Phoenix. Both headphones presented natural timbre for all the instruments. The decay was slightly faster on the GR1. In Want You Back by Haim, the GR1 again accentuated the sibilance in the primary vocalist. This was not harsh, but clearly not neutral either. The Phoenix also accentuated the sibilance, but it was not quite as sharp as on the GR1. At 8 seconds into the song, the primary vocalist says the word "we," and it sounds gravelly. Both headphones recreated this detail, but the GR1 had a slight edge in clarity and sharpness. Both headphones rendered the backup vocalist one in the left and the other in the right, and slightly behind the primary singer. On both headphones, all three vocalists had their individual tonalities when the instruments played softly, and when the instruments played at maximum, the backup vocalists melded into one voice. The drums, piano, guitar, and bass all sounded natural. However, the GR1 has slightly faster decay, particularly of the bassier notes. In Superposition by Young the Giant, the GR1 accurately recreated the ukulele and drums. However, the bass seemed a bit recessed. The male vocalist sounded smooth. He has sibilance as well, but the GR1 did not accentuate it. There is a backup vocalist in this track, but the GR1 was not able to present that detail overly clearly. On the Phoenix, the ukulele, drums, and bass all seemed to have accurate timbre. Indeed, the bass seemed a bit more obvious than it had on the GR1. The male vocalist sounded very similar to what I heard on the GR1. The Phoenix also did not make the backup vocalist clearly audible, but as with the GR1, I could almost hear him. Overall, the GR1 seems to have a slight difference in female vocal presentation. Both headphones accentuate sibilance for female vocalists, but the GR1 has a sharper emphasis. I also noticed that the GR1 presented vocals a step further away than what I heard on the Phoenix. In other words, vocals always seemed to be a bit closer to my ears on the Phoenix. This was not a significant difference, but one that I could eke out when I switched headphones back and forth in the middle of a song. Treble response between these headphones is close, but not quite the same. Indeed, the GR1 has a bit more clarity and slightly more energy. In Scherzo for X-Wings, the GR1 and Phoenix recreated the brass and horns so that they cut through the other instruments. These instruments retain their nasally sound signatures. However, the GR1 had a bit more emphasis to the brass and horns, and they had a bit more clarity in the mix. Instruments tended to meld on both headphones, but the GR1 provided a bit more separation among them. The timpani seemed slightly rolled off on the GR1 and was more audible on the Phoenix. Neither headphone produced verticality. The GR1 made the instruments sound almost like they were in a semicircle around me. The Phoenix rendered a fairly stereo effect without the same type of semicircle placement that I heard on the GR1. On Flight from the City, the Phoenix presented the piano as if it was about 5 to 6 feet away. Its bassier notes were easily audible but not boomy or distorted. The cello was smooth and melded marginally with the piano. I could hear the electric buzz effect, the creaking of wood on the pianist's bench, and the shifting of the cello. I could barely hear the pop and sizzle sounds recorded in the sub-layer of this track. The GR1 made the piano sound about 8 to 10 feet away. Its bassier notes were slightly underemphasized, especially compared to the Phoenix. There was a bit more clarity on the GR1, where I could hear the electric buzzing and pop and sizzle marginally more clearly. The cello was smooth and precise, but it did meld a little with the piano, similar to what I heard on the Phoenix. I could hear the creaking of wood and the shifting of the cello. I listened to several orchestral tracks. On each occasion, it appeared that the GR1 had a bit more energy to some instruments than the Phoenix. The differences sometimes were noticeable and other times they were barely perceptible. Instruments always sounded true with correct timbre. Neither headphone made any instrument sound peaky or harsh. Overall, the treble response is similar but not quite the same. The GR1 has a bit more treble energy than the Phoenix and a slight bit more clarity to boot. Throughout this video, I have tried to highlight the details both headphones provide. In this section, I will merely summarize. I think both headphones provide above average detail. The difference will be in clarity. The GR1 simply is a clearer sounding headphone, though not with every single track. In my experience, the clarity is more noticeable in the bass and treble and less so in the mids. People sometimes think that clarity automatically means a headphone has great detail retrieval. I think there might be a correlation, but it's not a hard and fast rule. A clearer sounding headphone may allow some details to be more easily audible, but it may still not be able to render all the details present. So while the GR1 is indeed a little bit clearer, it never provided details that were completely missing on the Phoenix. Instead, the GR1 merely makes the same details sound a bit more obvious. Both the GR1 and Phoenix rendered multiple vocalists, creaking of wood, electric buzzing, twang of guitar strings, and intakes of breaths. For a more quantitative test, I used the song New Light by Kazuki. This track has layers of details, including children playing, wind, rustling of grass, synth, and footsteps. I count the number of footsteps I can hear in the first 60 seconds. There are a number of headphones I use to establish a pseudo-graph of detailability. Every time I do a review, I listen to all of these headphones for this very specific test. The numbers I am about to relay are from listening to each of these following headphones using the same testing methodology as I have employed in this review. The Focal Clear presents 18 footsteps in this test track. The Austrian Audio Hi X55 presents 15 footsteps. The audeze LCD1, Sennheiser HD6XX, and 660S each present 6 to 7 footsteps. The Neumann NDH20 presents about 6 footsteps. The Sivga Phoenix presents 11 footsteps, and the Emotiva GR1 presents 10 to 11 footsteps. The interesting part of this test is that the GR1 does not render more details than the Phoenix. Some of the details are clearer on the GR1, there's no doubt about that. However, even though I listened over and over again at various volumes, I simply could not pick out any additional footsteps on the GR1 compared to the Phoenix. Soundstage on these headphones is similar. The GR1's slightly clearer presentation does give the impression of a marginally wider stage than the Phoenix, but the difference is not great. In my view, the Neumann NDH20 has below average soundstage. The audeze LCD1, Sennheiser HD6XX, and HD660S have about average soundstage. The Avantone Planar and Hi-Fi Man Sundara have above average to just below wide soundstage. The Hi-Fi Man Diva has wide soundstage. The HD800S has super wide soundstage. In my experience, both the Phoenix and GR1 are average to above average in soundstage. The songs you use will have a big effect on what you hear. Also keep in mind your other equipment and whether your amp or DAC have a warmer or more analytical sound signature. If that is the case, then some sounds might appear closer or further away. I think it is safe to say that neither the GR1 nor the Phoenix are neutral headphones. Instead, they are balanced sounding. There are differences in the stock configurations. For example, the GR1 has a sub-bass roll-off compared to the Phoenix. The GR1 also has slightly greater emphasis of sibilance and vocal grain. I think that the GR1 probably has a bit more treble energy, but not significantly. The GR1 tends to sound clearer than the Phoenix, but as we discovered during the detail test, that does not equate to more details being apparent. If comparing back and forth, one could argue that the Phoenix is the bassier of the two headphones. It is intriguing that both headphones do have a fairly robust bass response despite their open-back design. Sure, the HD6XX and 660S do as well, but in my experience, many open-back headphones have underrepresented bass. I cannot imagine that the GR1 and Phoenix are perfect headphones for everyone. There's always room for taste, and some people won't like either. My overall impression is that the GR1 does have some differences in sound, but those differences are not necessarily night and day. Indeed, as we will come to find in the next section, perhaps these two headphones are not that dissimilar at all. I briefly tried the Sivga leather earpads on the Phoenix and then compared to the GR1. The leather earpads are perforated. Using the same testing methodology, I listened back and forth and found a few interesting points. First, the sound signature of the Phoenix with the leather earpads gets very close to that of the GR1. In bass response, the two headphones tend to sound more alike. The sub-bass is slightly reduced on the Phoenix with the leather earpads. This results in a bit more clarity, though I think that the GR1 might slightly edge out the Phoenix in clarity still. The mids and treble come more in line with the GR1 when the Phoenix has the leather earpads attached. It's not a perfect match, but I think it gets closer than with the stock earpads. I then swapped the GR1's stock earpads with the Phoenix's stock earpads. And guess what? The GR1 had elevated sub-bass with the stock Phoenix earpads. I do not have two pairs of the Phoenix earpads, so I cannot do a true A/B test. Consequently, take all of this with a good dose of salt. But having heard the Phoenix and GR1 for months using their stock configurations, I think I have a reasonable idea of their sound signatures. I believe that the stock Phoenix earpads do alter the GR1's performance. That should not be a surprise, as we know that earpad changing does affect the sound. But what is a little surprising is how alike the headphones sound with the earpad swap. Out of curiosity, I put the GR1's stock earpads on the Phoenix and the stock Phoenix earpads on the GR1. Going back and forth, it appeared to me that the GR1 now had a bit more bass and the Phoenix had a bit less bass. I concede that maybe this is just my mind playing tricks, but when I'd listened to the Sicario soundtrack again, I got the impression that the Phoenix had a bit more clarity than the GR1. When I listened to Why Am I Like This and Want You Back using the configuration I just mentioned, the Phoenix had a bit of a bump in sibilance and grain, and the GR1 had a bit less than the Phoenix. Look, all of this is pretty unscientific. Without 4 different pairs of headphones with different earpads, it's not possible to say definitively if, in fact, pad swapping like this makes the headphones sound like each other. But I think this is what I heard. I still leave open the possibility that I am wrong. I said in my original Phoenix review that I do think that the Phoenix is value and worth considering. I stand by that assessment. In my GR1 review, I said I wasn't sure if the GR1 was value and would wait to pass judgment, and I think we are at that point. The GR1 and Phoenix outwardly are different. They use different marketing but are clearly aiming for the same audiophile market. You may or may not like the balanced sound signatures of these headphones, and that's entirely up to you. But neither headphone does anything wrong. There's no harsh treble spike, there's no audible distortion, there's no failure in construction. The headphones don't need a nuclear power plant to drive. Indeed, both seem to be competently built and tuned. And they seem a bit too similar. Look, I have no idea if these headphones are clones. There is no way for me to prove that, but we do have some indications. First, the overall physical designs may be outwardly different, but there are giveaways. The ear cup sizes are the same. The earpad padding is the same, and they have the exact same angles. Hell, the earpad attachment system is identical, and I don't know of any other headphone that uses the same type of attachment system as these two headphones. If you look at the specifications, you will notice some similarities. The Phoenix has 50mm polycarbonate film drivers. The impedance is 32 ohms with a frequency response of 20 Hz to 20 kHz. The sensitivity is 103 decibels. The GR1 also has 50mm polycarbonate drivers. Its frequency response is 23 Hz to 24.5 kHz with a sensitivity of 106 decibels. Yes, there are some differences, but apparently mostly due to tuning rather than actual physical alterations. Then, consider what I heard when I swapped the earpads. Again, take my impressions about this with a dose of salt, but I distinctly believe that pad swapping results in one headphone sounding like the other. So, is the GR1 a clone of the Phoenix but with slight variation? Is it really a clone when there are differences in frequency response and sensitivity? You decide. This brings us to value. I think that the Phoenix is value. If its sound signature and performance match your preferences, then the headphone really does nothing particularly wrong. The stock earpads could be more comfortable, but I've found that over time the headphones become easier to wear. I think $250 is probably the limit of the price point. Any more and I think you'll start having other headphones to consider. But how much more is too much more? Funny enough, I think the GR1 asks you that question. The GR1 is $300 and is really pushing the limits, I think. Out of the box, the GR1 and Phoenix do sound different enough. You can tell one is clearer than the other, though not by a significant amount, not night and day. One has more bass than the other. One has a bit more sibilance and treble energy. But swap the earpads and those differences start melting away. I cannot prove that the GR1 is a Phoenix clone or a ripoff, but I do have my suspicions. Can you buy the Phoenix and the Sivga leather earpads to make the Sivga Phoenix sound more like the Emotiva GR1? Yes, I think so. But break down the cost of that. The Phoenix costs $250 roughly. The earpads cost about $15. So shipping and taxes not included, you would pay $265 to get a sound similar to the GR1. Compare that to the GR1's $300 price tag. I suppose there would not be a big difference in price at that point. But think of this question in the reverse. If you bought the GR1 and put the stock Phoenix earpads on that, could you make the GR1 sound more like the Phoenix? Yes, I think so. It won't be a perfect match, but oh so close. So, you would pay $300 for the GR1, not including taxing and shipping, and another $15 for the earpads. For a total of $315, you could make the GR1 sound very close to the $250 stock Phoenix. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Of course, most people won't buy both headphones. The question you will have is, which one is better? Well, I already highlighted the differences throughout this video. You will need to figure out if one is better than the other for your own setup and preferences. Is the GR1 value at $300? Well, grudgingly, yes, but Emotiva is really pushing it.